So we are heading towards the Holocene, well, going through the Holocene, heading towards the modern period, to the Industrial Revolution, and what will happen in the future in terms of climate and health. So we are now into Romans, Mayans, and the Anasazi, the classical optimum to droughts in the Americas. So we'll look at several civilizations. Again, I will keep it short when it is just related to climate change and impact on civilizations, even though among all of them the theme is still that when there is climate change that affected civilizations, there was issues of food production, agriculture, nutrition, and health, even though there are not very specific examples of health outcomes as such. But here we will see that Romans did get affected by health issues, and there are other examples we will look at in terms of the plagues and so on. Okay, I never get tired of looking at these Holocene figures. Each one does it slightly differently. This is from the Smithsonian, time going this way, and we are looking at the range of temperature over the Holocene since the end of the last ice age, after the Younger Dryas, a range of 6 degrees centigrade. So you had large mammals go extinct. We talked about this a little bit in terms of the climate impacts versus human impacts. This is looking at the climatic optimum with the rise and expansion of the Egyptian empire, culture, tombs, mummies, pyramids, and so on. And then came Mesopotamian early civilization. We will focus on this period here, where we are going to look at the warming and the cooling. So the Roman Empire expansion, and then getting hit by various climate issues. This scale is too coarse, but we will see a more detailed one in a minute. And that's the detailed one here, looking at the end of the last glacial period, low frequency change in temperature, and all kinds of little bumps happened when you look at average northern hemisphere temperatures here. And we are looking at periods around 6 BCE. Before Common Era, we had the so-called climatic optimum, so 180 degrees collapsed precessional cross receding waters, kind of a detail of climate that we didn't talk about. Descent of highlanders to settle pre-dynastic Egypt circa 6,000 years ago. So the climate optimas occurred here with little cooling periods with pre-dynastic Egypt, 4500 to 3100 BC. The dynastic period begins here, going backward in time. We talked about the Bronze Age, not so much the Iron Age, but the coldest Holocene climate minima occurred around here, which led to all kinds of problems that we talked about. Roman climate optima, where agricultural expansion, prosperity, cities, invasions, Roman Empire expansion, and so on, and then the cooling. So peak of the Roman Empire happened around here, and then the cooling brought diseases, food shortage, nutrition issues, and loss of military in terms of just recruits, and then fights with all kinds of external influences, Huns, barbarians, and so on and so forth. We will look at the Mayas from 300 CE Common Era to 900 Common Era, and that's not so much of a direct health story as multiple droughts which are happening now as well, which is related to how the Pacific Ocean responds to global warming. In the Eastern Pacific, if it remains cold and in a kind of La Nina pattern, it creates dry periods in the Americas, and the Western US right now is going through a record-breaking heat dome and heat waves all the way into Canada. That's kind of related to these extinction or demise of the Mayan culture as well. And then we had Little Ice Age, which we'll look at in the next chapter, and coming into Industrial Revolution and going into the future. So there are some details. This is from Pages, which is giving us a longer term vision again in terms of Holocene thermal maximum, so humid active monsoon regions, civilizations, warm dry periods here. So whenever you have cool lower frequency El Niños here, you have dry periods over the Americas, except here, which has a humid period, and cool periods here, cool periods here, cool and dry here, warm here, and so on. And when you have the neoglacial period, you can see that you got much dryness, weak monsoon, extinction, demise of civilizations, dry, weak monsoons, humid periods. So you can see the contrast here: dry, weak, and humid periods here, humid and dry periods. So contrasting climates happen as the ITCZ shifts on low frequencies. Okay, so most of the epidemics that have happened along the way have been associated with climate change, which we can think of as secular trends. So they happen over multiple decades and centuries, and they're associated with right now we have pandemic COVID. We had the Spanish flu in the early 20th century, which killed maybe up to 50 million people. COVID is managed better. The deaths are not in multiple millions, but the numbers are not in yet. But we'll see some big plagues along the way: the Justinian plague and the Black Plague, which killed 100 million and maybe 200 million respectively, and associated with climate as well. So this is a nice figure showing age in thousands of years before present, so going back to again 10,000 years, and we have the mildly varying Holocene epoch that we have been talking about. So we are already in global warming here since the Industrial Revolution. Going from here, Mesolithic era, 7500 BC to late Upper Paleolithic, pre-urban Neolithic, urban Neolithic, and Roman Age to industrial, so first AD to 1800 AD. Human populations, largely mobile populations, low density, limited contact. Urban settlements were not there with high densities. Small permanent settlements, increasing density and contacts, which immediately leads to infectious disease outbreaks. Urban centers with close inter and intra-settlement contacts. Armies, imperialism, colonization, class structure, armed conflicts associated with climate impacts like droughts always have and famines always have health outbreaks. Development of the modern world here. So looking at the influence of biota, we had predation on wild animals and collection of plant food, etc. So ectoparasites, domestication of dog happened, cultivation of crops, domestication of sheep, goat, cattle, and pig. We already talked about things like TB and other diseases that humans inherited, plus the change from a predominantly protein-based diet during the predation on wild animals to agricultural carbohydrate-heavy diet also led to various things like diabetes and other things. Storage, pests, field pests, so you started to have malnutrition and outbreaks, which we will look at in a minute. Large-scale trade and common markets, so diseases getting transferred outside, diseases coming in and becoming endemic over time. Introduction of alien domesticates and so on. So starting again here, direct contact, meat, blood, saliva, we are looking at malaria, yellow fever, leishmaniasis, trypanosomiasis, or the sleep sickness, right? Various platymintis, rabies, hydatid parasites, so direct or indirect contacts, rat, mouse, initial introduction of syntropic insects, plague. So basically there are ticks, fleas, which survive on rats, and they have evolved over time to not kill too many rats because they want to survive over time and reproduce and so on. But if the mortality rate goes up in rats, and then the fleas manage to use humans as hosts and create plague, so there is a climate impact there in terms of how food production and rats cohabiting with humans chose fields versus storage places, so human contact changes and plague outbreaks, and then transmission, mostly not so much within human to human, but still through mice and the fleas. So again here, cultivation of crops leading to contacts, changes in meat, blood, saliva, milk, hair. So you had brucellosis, tuberculosis, typhus, which we talked about in terms of louse making humans as host. Indirect contacts leading to anthrax, smallpox, influenza, cholera, typhoid, major epidemics, syphilis. More recently we have had HIV and Lyme disease and so on. So that gives us an idea of how over time climate change, diet change, technology change, conflicts and so on have combined to create human health, human ecology, all interacting together. Coming more specifically to infectious diseases, local epidemics, and major urban plagues, as early as 166 to 190 Common Era, in the heyday of Roman Empire, the first great epidemic, the Antonine Plague, swept around the empire for several decades, seriously eroding population numbers, military strength, and social stability. The disease first broke out in the Middle East and was brought by the army to Rome, where at its height it caused up to 2,000 deaths a day. So imagine the population at the time and fraction of people who were dying per day. So this is a great combination of empire expansion, militaries going elsewhere and bringing back plague, and how human ecology interacted with climate change, nutrition. So the cooling that happened after the peak of the Roman heyday empire, you started having combinations of climate change, food shortage, nutrition, migration, and plague outbreaks, and massive mortalities, and so on. So let me stop this podcast here and start more gory details of how plague affected humans along the way. We have had several plague outbreaks, as I mentioned, and we are now having COVID. Plague is still around, several thousand per year. There has been one little outbreak in India back in, I don't know, 2004, maybe. You can check it out, but it's not a major concern right now. But with climate change, changes in rainfall patterns, droughts, mice still being around, we don't know if and when the next plague outbreak may happen. So we have to worry about that when we come to climate change impacts on human health, okay, going into the future.